What are the different stages of psychosexual development? What is the meaning of fixation and where are we fixated? These and more are the things that we'll be going to talk about today. Hello everyone! Today we'll be discussing the different stages of psychosexual development according to Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud is one of the most controversial and popular psychologists who studied the development of personality. Freud's theory remains to be one of the most influential in the field of psychology, despite the fact that many of his views were criticized and debunked. And according to him, a person undergoes the different stages of development, and each stage is marked by conflicts or issues or needs that could either build growth or stifle development depending on how they are being resolved. And if these psychosexual stages are completed successfully, then a healthy personality is the result. Now, he also identified specific erogenous zones or pleasure zones for each of the different stages. And if there are certain issues that are not resolved in those specific stages, fixations will come in. Fixations are our attachments to people or things that persist from childhood to adulthood. In other words, we become obsessed or fixated on things because we are stuck somewhere in our own growth and development. So what are the different stages of psychosexual development? The first one is the oral stage. Okay, this happens from birth to 18 months. The erogenous zone or the pleasure zone in this particular stage is the mouth, meaning the child finds satisfaction and pleasure by using their mouth most of the time. This explains why infants suck almost continuously even when they are not being fed. They suck their thumb and they are being comforted with pacifiers, and when they become older they tend to put everything in their mouth. Food, toys, lahat ng nahawakan nila, even soil, or even their own poop. So if they cannot satisfy this need or they are overindulged in this particular stage, they may become fixated in the oral stage. So, people who are fixated in this particular stage manifest habits like smoking, overeating, alcohol abuse, nail biting, or even too much talking, especially when they are stressed, anxious, and tensed. So a person who is dissatisfied in this particular stage, meaning hindi niya masyadong nagawa, hindi niya masyadong nasatisfy yung oral needs niya in this particular stage, this person may develop this personality called oral receptive character. And a person who has an oral receptive character is a person who becomes too dependent on others. He or she is easily being fooled, he or she easily believes others' ideas, and he or she lacks the leadership skill. But a person who is overindulged in this particular stage, ibig sabihin na sobrahan ang pagsasatisfy ng kanyang bunganga, bigay ng bigay, na sobrahan, sak siya ng sak ng kung anong sinusubo niya, then this particular person may develop an oral aggressive character. And if this person has this, he becomes self-centered, demanding, argumentative. He would also become verbally abusive and aggressive in relating with other people. And at times, this person also becomes, this person also gossips a lot. So, hindi pwedeng sobrahan at hindi rin pwedeng bawasan ang pag-satisfy, pagpunan, kapag pinunan ang mga pangangailangan ng ito ng mga bata in this particular stage. The next stage is the anal stage from 18 months to 3 years of age. So in this particular stage, the child's focus of pleasure is the anus. So meaning, the child finds satisfaction in eliminating or in, retaining feces. So according to Freud, the role of the parents in this particular stage is very crucial, especially in toilet training. Freud believes that the positive experience during toilet training would give a positive impact to the lives of this child when he grows older. But sad to say, hindi lahat ng mga magulang ay very supportive at hindi lahat ng mga magulang would encourage positively yung kanilang mga anak in this particular stage. Merong mga magulang who would even punish or who would even ridicule and shame their child kapag aksidente or kapag hindi niya napipigilan yung pagtain niya sa kung saan man. Right? And these particular actions of parents would lead to different personality traits. So according to Freud, inappropriate parental response can result in negative outcomes. So if the parents who would approach toilet training as lenient or too lenient, ibig sabihin napakabait niya, hinahayaan niya lang yung anak niya tumaik sa kung saan man, hindi niya trinitrain ng maayos yung anak niya sa pagpunta sa CR at doon, magbawas, this child could actually develop a particular personality called anal expulsive personality. At paglaki daw ng batang merong anal expulsive personality, ay isa siyang person who becomes messy and disorganized, wasteful, and who would also develop a destructive personality. But if the parents are too strict in the toilet training or started the toilet training too early, Freud believes that an anal retentive personality will be developed by this particular kid. And a person who has anal retentive personality becomes obsessive about cleanliness, about perfection, and about control. Okay, so anal retentive and anal repulsive, these are actually the personality adopted or developed by a child based on how this child is toilet trained. Next is the phallic stage from 3 to 6 years of age. And in this particular stage, the pleasure zone is the genitals. So in this particular stage, the children become interested in the differences of the boys and of the girls. And sometimes you could also see kids in this particular age bracket who would be fondling with their genitals. Okay? So Freud believed that in this particular stage, boys developed unconscious desire to their mothers, and they consider their fathers as rivals to their mother's love. So these feelings is what Freud called the Oedipus complex. Okay, and Oedipus is also a character in the Greek mythology, and he was the one who unintentionally killed his own father and married his own mother. The same is true with psychology. A person or a kid has Oedipus complex if he loves his mother more than his own father, or he loves his mother and considers his father as a rival to his mother's love. That's Oedipus complex. And in this particular stage of Oedipus complex, the boys may also be afraid of their fathers because their fathers might punish them for such feeling. Thus, castration anxiety comes into picture. Castration anxiety is a concept wherein the son is afraid that his father will damage his genitals because of his sexual feelings towards his own mother. So as a result, the son would repress his feelings towards his mother and identifies himself with his father and develops, masculine characteristics and identify himself as male. So for this particular child, that's the only way for him not to be punished by his own father. But some psychoanalysts also believe that girls in this particular stage also have such similar experience. They also develop an unconscious attraction towards their father, and they called it the Electra complex. Psychoanalysts also believe that girls in this particular stage also have the similar experience, and they also develop unconscious affection towards their father, and they actually call it Electra complex. So if the Electra complex, okay, it's actually the time when the daughters would love the fathers more than the mothers. So if the males experience castration anxiety, the females, according to Freud, also experience penis envy. Ito yung time when the daughter is initially attached to the mother, but then she realizes na wala pala siyang penis. So she desires her father, whom she sees as a means to obtain a penis substitute. She then, also repress her own desires for her father and incorporates the values of her mother instead. Okay? So, ito yung siguro para sa akin, this is where the terms mama's boy and papa's girl would come into picture. Mama's boy, the boy would love the mother more than the father, and the papa's girl, the girl would love the father more than the mother. So the fixation in this particular stage could result to sexual deviances or even weak and confused sexual identity. It's where you're going to experience identity crisis. Okay? Next, latency stage would be from 6 years old to puberty, and in this particular stage, sexual urges remain repressed. So, the children's focus here is in the acquisition of the physical and academic skills. So, boys would usually go with more boys and girls would go with more girls. So, the latent period is the time of exploration in which the sexual energy is repressed, thus it becomes dormant, and the energy is rechanneled to other areas such as intellectual pursuit or such as social interactions. So the kids in this particular stage would tend to develop their sexual desires, according to Freud, because their energy is rechanneled to doing something more important in that particular stage. That is why in this latency period, it is important that the kid or the kids would develop social and communication skills and at the same time self-confidence. And the fixation in this particular stage can result in immaturity and inability to form fulfilling relationship as an adult. Next, you also have the genital stage. In this is from puberty onwards. In this particular stage, sexual urges are awakened, so the adolescents focus their sexual urges towards their opposite sex. It's where siguro mga love would come in, relationship would come in, and the pleasure is centered on the genitals. So during the final stage of psychosexual development, the individual develops a strong sexual interest in the opposite sex, and it actually begins in puberty and would last all throughout the rest of the person's life. So in the earlier stages of psychosexual development, the focus was solely on individual needs. In this particular stage, the welfare of others is already being considered. So the goal of this stage is to establish a balance in the different aspects of life, the different areas of life. Okay? Those are the different stages of development with the corresponding fixations according to Freud. So now we can examine ourselves and the people around us, and let us be the judge as to whether or not Freud's theory be debunked. Goodbye, see you next time. everyone, today we shall be talking about the three components of personality according to Sigmund Freud: the id, the ego, and the superego. According to Freud, although each of these components has unique features, they interact to form a whole, and that interaction makes a relative contribution to one's behavior. Now, let's try to discuss the first component, which is the id. According to Sigmund Freud, the id is the unconscious part of your personality. And actually, a child, according to him, is born with the id. So it's basically the childish and the impulsive part of you that just does what it wants or gets what it wants without thinking of the consequences. So for instance, a baby is hungry. So the id wants food or milk. So the baby would cry until such time that he or she is given with what he or she wants. Now, nothing else really matters to id except the satisfaction of its own needs or of its own desires, regardless of reality or regardless of the consequences. If the id wants something, it must get it no matter what. So this explains why a baby, di ba? Papansin natin, a baby does not have a sense of time. The baby does not mind the people around him. The baby would cry any time of the day or any time of the night kapag gutom siya, kapag uncomfortable siya, kapag wet siya or kapag sleepy siya, at hindi niya kino-consider yung nanay niyang pagod or yung tatay niyang natutulog. Because if the id wants something, it wants it fast. Now, ngayon, paano naman nagwo-work ang id sa mga kagaya nating medyo may edad na, matatanda na? So, gaya ngayon, meron po tayong mga modules na ginagawa at tinutulungan din natin yung mga anak natin gumawa ng kanya-kanyang mga modules. So, the id would give us thoughts like, why would I make my module? I'm not even happy making my own module. It makes my life miserable. It makes my life difficult. I cannot do other things, more pleasurable things than modules. So the id would also put pressure in us and would tell us and would make us come up or do other more pleasurable activities than module making or answering of module. Like, oh hindi, mag-ano ka na lang, mag-login ka na lang sa social media sites or manood ka na lang ng pelikula sa Netflix kasi maraming mga magaganda doon. So if we give into that, if we give into the need of the id, then hindi ka talaga gagawa ng module mo, hindi ka talaga magsasagot ng module mo, manunood ka na lang ng The Queen's Gambit if that's the case, alright? So, another example, naki-birthday ka, okay? At nakita mo ang sarap ng mga handa nila, paborito mo lahat ng mga nakahain sa mesa. Pero you notice na yung handa niya ay parang hindi sapat para sa lahat ng umattend sa birthday celebration na yon. Pero dahil paborito mo lahat ng nakahanda doon, your id would tell you to eat everything that you like. The id would tell you na magpakabusog ka hanggang kaya mo. The id would tell you na kuha ka lang ng food, kuha ka lang ng kuha ng food. Wag mong wag mong isipin kung may kakainin pa yung iba o wala na. So that's the id that would want you to do, to eat a lot, to eat whatever you want to eat, even if other people might not have something to eat later on. So importante para sa kanya, you give into this desire, you give into this need. Okay? So kung durbab ka, madim na pigilan ti kinadurbab mo, kain ka na lamon ka na lang ng lamon. So kahit na maraming nakakita sa'yo, wala ka nang pakialam sa kanila. Because that's what it does. It operates on the pleasure principle. It always increases pleasure, but it wants to increase pleasure rather, and it wants to decrease pain. So kung pleasurable yung pagkain sa'yo, pakainin ka niya ng pakainin, tapos pag later on, feeling mo busog ka, matabang-mataba ka na, kailangan mo nang burn ng konting calories at mag-exercise sana, sasabihin ng id sa'yo, huwag kang mag-exercise. Mamaya pagkatapos mo mag-exercise, sasakit ang muscles mo, sasakit ang likod mo, manghihina ka. So yun, it increases pleasure but it decreases pain. Alright? So it literally responds to the basic urges, it responds immediately to needs and the desires regardless of the consequences. That's why according to Freud, the id is illogical, it's unreasonable, it's primitive. Alright? Next, what is ego naman? So sabi nila, habang lumalaki yung bata, the child learns to mingle with the people around him and he learns how to relate more to the environment that he is in, and that he is directly influenced as well by the outside factor or by the external world. So dito daw, it's where ego develops. Because according to Freud, the ego is the decision-making components of your personality. If the id operates on pleasure, the ego is the decision-making component. Okay? So let's go back to the answering of module. So if you have the ego, or if the ego is stronger than that of the id, di ba, you are torn between, do I have to do my module or mamaya ko nagagawin yan? So kapag sinabi ng id mo na wag mo nang gawin ang module mo, manood ka na lang ng TV, ang sasabihin naman sa'yo ng ego mo, you do your module, you answer your module because that is what you're supposed to do. That is the right thing to be done. Because if you will not answer the module, you will be reprimanded by your teachers or you will eventually fail. So the ego operates on the reality principle, and the ego helps you do things that are acceptable by the society. So doon sa birthday celebration, ang dami kang nakitang food pero hindi siya sapat para sa lahat ng dumalo sa birthday celebration na yon. Even if the id wants you to eat everything on the table, then the ego would say, no, you should not eat everything, kontrolin mo ang sarili mo kasi meron pang ibang kakain ng mamayan. Hindi lang ikaw ang bisita. Han kang agsupsuputon, tahan lang si Kati bisita. So that's basically what the id tells you, right? It helps you control your appetite and it helps you control your cravings for things. So the ego enables the person to control their impulses and to demonstrate self-control, and it helps a person decide on things basically because ang pipiliin niya lagi ay kung anong acceptable sa isang society. Alright? At ang last, ang super ego. Ang super ego naman daw, kung ang id ay ang desire, ang ego ay ang decision component, ang ego naman daw ay ang moralidad, your morality. So your super ego controls the id's impulses, and it persuades the ego na hindi lang dapat siya maging realistic, dapat maging moralistic din siya, at dapat mag-strive siya to be perfect. Okay? So the super ego consists of two systems. We have the conscience and that of the ideal self. Yung conscience mo can punish the ego through causing feelings of guilt. So, for instance, kapag ang ego would give in to the desires of the id, the super ego make the person feel guilty or feel bad about sa nangyari. So, ang ideal self naman, ito naman yung this creates an imaginary picture of how you ought to be, your aspirations, what are your aspirations, and how you're supposed to treat the people around you, and at the same time, how to behave well in the society where you belong. So if you do what super ego wants, okay, it will reward you with pride. Yes, natapos kong gawin yung module ko, na-beat ko yung deadline, I'm so happy with myself, I'm so proud of myself because I did my module despite the fact that there are many temptations. Yon, it gives you the sense of pride. Pero kapag hindi ka sumunod sa sinasabi ng super ego, it would give you the feeling of guilt. Oh my, I'm such a terrible student, I was not able to answer my module, I will eventually fail later on, sayang yung pinampabayad ng nanay ko sa tuition ko. That's it. Alright? It gives you the sense of pride once you follow what it wants, but it gives you the sense of guilt if you do otherwise. Okay? So yan yung trabaho ng super ego. At ang super ego, the ideal self and the conscience, it says they are largely determined in childhood from the inculcated parental values. So meaning, dito na naman nag-uugat ang lahat. It's really very important that parents are supportive of their kids, pero hindi naman yung masyadong mahigpit. Because rearing kids is like holding a very wet soap.
Kapag sobrang higpit yung pagkakahawak mo ng basang sabon, hahanap yan ng way para makaalis dun sa pagkakahawak mo. But if you are holding the wet soap, gentle lang na may pagmamahal, then it will not find ways para makaalis sa pangangalaga mo. And that's basically the role of the parents. We have to love our kids enough to let them, love that is enough to let them grow, be happy, and be morally upright. Alright? So in summary, I would like to summarize that id is primitive, it's instinctual part of the mind, kasi it talks about the drives, the desires, the wants. The superego operates on the moral conscience, on the morality or on the conscience, and the ego is the realistic part that mediates between the desires of the id and the desires of the superego. Okay, so my challenge to you is that how can you balance the three components of your personality? So you can share your thoughts by using the comment section below. Goodbye. Good morning, everyone. Last time you found out situations that may block you from communicating effectively. Today we will discuss simple and doable strategies to avoid the barriers to effective communication. These are the strategies to avoid communication breakdown. First, clarify your thoughts before speaking. There is a need to clarify your thoughts before verbalizing them. This would avoid discrepancy between what is said or what is meant, or between what is said and what is understood. This would allow you ensure more precise or more accurate message to convey. Next, learn to listen. Listening and hearing are two different entities. Listening is more than just hearing. So to make intellectual judgments or sound criticisms, you have to apply the art of listening. Once you do not understand the message conveyed, do not hesitate to ask for further explanations. You have to clarify things out, or you have to ask questions politely. If you do not know, ask. If you do not understand, ask. It's better to be a fool for a second than to be a fool for a lifetime. Next, be cautious with your paralanguage. Your paralanguage refers how something is said and not what is said. So it has something to do with how you say a message, your tone, your pitch, or even your manner of speaking. So when you speak, you have to keep your emotions in check, you have to maintain eye contact with your audience, and you have to adopt a relaxed tone when conversing with others. Next, build your confidence. Confidence and self-esteem, though often linked, are not the same thing. Confidence is a term that we use when we describe how we feel about our ability to perform a task, but self-esteem is how we feel about ourselves, the way we think, the way we look, whether or not we're worthy or valued. So we have to be confident and at the same time have a positive self-esteem. But do not overdo it, because everything which is overdone is wrong. How should we develop our self-confidence? First, you have to practice. Practice speaking in public. Practice exposing yourself to the crowd. If you allow yourself to do it, it becomes a part of you, it becomes your habit, until such time that you become better with what you are practicing. Next, ask for feedback from credible people. Positive or negative feedback are useful for growth. Just make sure that you ask feedback from people who would want you to grow, not from people who only would want to tell you what you would want to hear. Lastly, you also have to observe others' way of communicating. Learn from them. Imitate what's good in them. Next, listen with both eyes and ears. Pay close attention to non-verbal cues and to verbal cues. We cannot communicate effectively by just using verbal cues. By changing our tone, our gestures, we can enforce what we are saying, and we can emphasize what we would want our audience to remember. Did you know that when we are talking to people, or that when we communicate with other people, they only absorb 7% of what we say, but they absorb 93% of how we say it? They are focusing on the non-verbal cues. So listen to the words used by the speakers, but you also have to pay close attention to how these words are uttered. So do not just say you love the person, you also have to show him or her your good intentions. Because many times, actions are more credible than words. Next, minimize distractions. Look for a place where you could focus and concentrate. Stay away from an environment which is not conducive for growth and learning. Same is true in life. If you are people who distract you from achieving your goals, people who lead you to a not so good path, leave them. Minimize distractions. Next, be specific. Use simple and concise words as much possible when you are delivering a message. Be particular with what you want to express. Be direct to the point, because the goal of communication is to express, not to impress. And do not jump to conclusions immediately. People tend to jump to conclusions as easy as possible. Before giving your conclusions or your judgment, make sure that you listen attentively to the message so that you won't be misled. Conclusions should be extracted from a thorough analysis of the given information. You also do not want to be judged easily without knowing the real you, right? And how can we eradicate, if not avoid, this communication breakdown? The answer lies in the application of the 7 C's to effective communication. First, completeness. The speaker has to make sure that the message contains everything that the receiver needs to hear and understand. Important details and specificities must be included so that listeners would grasp the intended meaning. Completeness leaves no room for doubt in the mind of the readers and of the audience. Conciseness. The message should be stated using direct and straightforward words. Unnecessary words or irrelevant information must be eliminated. Be brief. The challenge, saying more by saying less. Next, consideration. In order to be effective, the speaker should be considerate of and respect the background of the receiver, such as the culture, the education, the feelings of the audience. These would bring rapport and connection. Concreteness. Effective communication should be backed up by real-life examples and experience. Support your ideas with facts and figures. Use words that are clear and cannot be subject to misinterpretation. Courtesy. Courtesy is the respect that we show to other people. So while sending the message, we have to be polite, sincere, enthusiastic, and reflective, and respect the receiver's culture, values, and feelings. Show respect, and respect will be given to you as well. Clearness and clarity. The use of simple and specific words to avoid confusion. Through this, you are able to emphasize a specific message, and the message will be clearly articulated. Because of clarity, the understanding of ideas becomes easier. The meanings of the words is enhanced, and the message becomes more appropriate and exact. Correctness. The understanding of your audience is directly proportional to the correctness of your ideas, because correct communication of ideas and thoughts is also an error-free form of communication. Because of correctness, the confidence level of your confidence level as well as that of your audiences would increase. So accuracy in grammar boosts credibility and effectiveness of the message and eliminate negative impact to the audience. So those are the tested strategies on how to avoid and overcome communication breakdown. If you apply everything you have learned from this video, I am positive that you will become the best communicators that you desire to become. But if you have other self-made strategies to address barriers to communication, feel free to share those to everyone by using the comment box below. Goodbye! See you next time. What is communication breakdown? What are the barriers to communication? These are the things that we'll be talking about today. You have learned from your previous module that the main goal of communication is understanding. We communicate because we would want to understand the people around us as much as we would want to be understood. But at times, even after taking care of every detail, some misunderstanding still arise in any part of the communication process. And in many communication situations, the message may not be received exactly the way the sender intended. And it is where communication breakdown comes in. Communication breakdown happens every time a communicator miscommunicates what he or she is trying to say, and that the hearer or the receiver misinterprets and misunderstands what has been communicated. Now, this could be due to the different barriers to communication. The first barrier, you have the physical barriers. These are the natural and the environmental conditions that create communication gap between the sender and the receiver. These are the disturbances that are external to both speaker and listener, which hamper the physical transmission of signal or of the message. And examples of the physical barriers are people talking too loud sound of the karaoke, or even the loud party of the neighbors while you were trying to record something, even the irritating hum of your air conditioner or of your electric fan, and the distance between the speaker and the listener. So all these necessary noise or sound or anything that blocks you from listening to and understanding the message are all physical barriers. The second one, we have psychological barriers. These are the mental barriers, which could either be social or personal issues that block you from communicating with others. This is very much connected with the negative self-image that we project to the people around us. Example of these psychological barriers are your negative self-esteem, your lack of confidence, the poor social skills that you have, your negative thoughts about how people would view you, the trauma, depression, fear, problems. All these are the psychological barriers that would hinder you from understanding or from communicating with other people. The next one is the cultural barriers. These barriers are encountered by people regarding their values, their beliefs, and their traditions, which are in conflict with others. So, people's culture affect the way they communicate and relate to others. What is acceptable in this particular culture might be a taboo in this particular culture. That is why when you are communicating, you have to take into account cultural practices and cultural backgrounds of your audience or of the receivers, and that there is a need for you to be culturally appropriate. What are the examples of these cultural barriers? You have your different beliefs, the traditions and the customs that are not in consonance with other people. You also have the manner of dressing, the values, the dialects, the language that you're using, even your approach to life, your way of living, or even your way of thinking, the body language and the gestures, which actually have different meaning when it comes to other cultures. All these cultural backgrounds and cultural practices really would contribute to communication breakdown. The last one, we also have this called linguistic barriers. These linguistic barriers are the most common communication barriers, which cause misunderstandings and misinterpretations between and among people. So communications really becomes difficult in situations where people do not understand each other's language. So how could you understand the meaning being conveyed by this particular person if you do not have any idea about what he or she is talking about, and you do not have any idea about the language that he or she is using? If the communicator and the receiver do not use the same language, then there is no message being conveyed. However, even when communicating in the same language, the terminology used in a message may act as a barrier as well. An example of this would be you are using the same language, English, but you are coming up with different terminologies or different technical terms because you are from different professions, then that could be a barrier to communication. Another examples of linguistic barriers would be the use of, like what I said, the technical jargons, the slang, the differences in the language, or even the accent or the dialect, if there are speech defects or language impairments, or even the grammar. These are all barriers to communication. But similarly, Vertiver presents various barriers to communication but classifies this into three kinds of noise: the internal noise, the external noise, and that of the semantic noise. External noise is similar to that of the physical barrier, but in the external noise, it's the sight, the sound, or everything that draw people's attention away from the intended meaning. Example of this will be the noise from the vehicles around you, even the visual aids used by the teachers during discussion, the bark of the dog. These could be barriers to communication. The second one is the internal noise, which is kind of similar to that of the psychological barriers that we previously discussed. These are the internal hindrances or the internal distractions that hinder meaning. The thoughts, the emotions, the feelings that interfere with the meaning. So in fact, a person is emotionally mature and can handle his or her emotions or feelings very well, could become a very good communicator. On the other hand, a person who let his emotion overpower everything, then he will be facing certain difficulties. True enough that, even in the classroom, if you are not concentrating, if you are not focused on a certain task, if you are thinking other things, or you are bombarded with so many problems, that would not allow you understand exactly what is being communicated by the teacher. Another example of internal noise, you have fear of speaking in front of the class, when you're also afraid of being criticized, or if you are bothered by some problems. So those are considered internal noise. The next one, you have semantic noise. These are the noise, this is the noise that is connected with the speaker, when the speaker and the listener have different meaning systems, meaning the words that I'll be using might have another meaning in the minds of the person I am talking to. So this semantic noise does not have any sound, but rather ambiguity in words, in sentences, or in other symbols used in communication. So examples of this semantic noise are incorrect grammar. You have abstract ideas which are open for misinterpretations, the use of technical jargons at the same time, or even the use of the figurative language, because figurative language could be interpreted in various ways, and your interpretation might be different from the interpretation that the speaker would want to tell you. Alright, so like what we have said, interpretations are very relative. So if there is misunderstanding because of the words, because of the meanings of the words that you give, then that's basically a semantic noise. So those are the three kinds of noise: semantic, internal, and external noise. So there you have it. If you could add a barrier to communication based on your experience, I would be very happy to read all those in the comment section. Goodbye. See you next time. Good evening, everyone. This video is primarily done for my students who were not able to participate in our online class this morning.
My subject or our subject is human growth and development. And I know you have a vast knowledge as regards this one because you had this when you were younger. But the main focus of our subject will be on the recent researches about human growth and development and their possible implications to our own field of specialization. That is why there is a need to revisit the basic concepts and issues of human development. But there is also a need to differentiate these two things, though many people tend to make use of these two terms interchangeably to mean the same thing. But in reality, these two words are quite different and they have many differences that you could ever imagine. First of which is that when we speak of growth, it mainly focuses on the quantitative improvement, while development is associated with both quantitative and qualitative. Let's try to have growth first. Growth is focusing on the quantitative. It's quantitative simply because the changes that is happening in a person is being measured and it can be seen by the naked eye. So like if the child grows, basically there is a change in size or in shape or even in height. This person becomes taller or this person becomes bigger. It's growth because it can be seen, it can be measured. However, development is associated with qualitative and that of quantitative improvement. An example would be the improvement in the cognitive ability of a child. Okay? The changes in the child's mental ability can never be seen at a glance, can never be understood at a glance. Right? But this change, this qualitative change, the change in the cognitive ability becomes quantitative or can be quantified if the person is subjected to comprehensive evaluative tool, like that of the IQ level. The changes in the IQ is qualitative, but once the person finds out the IQ level of this child, this cognitive ability then, or the IQ level then, becomes quantitative. Next, growth takes place within a limited scope of time, while development takes place within a vast scope of time. So in growth, there is a limited scope in time. For instance, a girl stops getting taller when she reaches 14 or 15 years old. Okay? And it's expected that this girl becomes fully developed and becomes a woman at the age of 25. But for men, boys would stop growing at the age of 16 and becomes fully developed at the age of 18. Okay? So there is basically a limited scope of time. After 18, wala nang development. After 25, wala nang masyadong nangyayaring growth. But development, on the other hand, takes place within a vast scope of time. So there is development from conception to death. Okay? Even at old age, at the age of 50, the person still develops. The person still learns a lot of things. Kaya nga dito lumabas yung tinatawag nilang the wisdom of the old. As you grow older, you tend to be wiser. As you grow older and experience vast plethora of experiences, then you tend to be knowledgeable as regards dealing with complexities of life. Another thing, growth is dependent of cellular changes, while development is dependent on organizational transformation. So as your cell grows, as your cell changes, okay, cell inside the body changes, that is actually being reflected in your physical attributes. But in the development, it's dependent on the organizational transformation. An example would be arithmetic and reading are actually signs of development, okay? And the skill one learns from reading and arithmetic, dadalhin niya yun hanggang pagtanda niya until such time that this person is in the matured or in the right age, he or she already knows how to deal with life complexities or more complex activities about reading and about computation. Another, growth is associated with progressive physical change from one stage to another. But on the other hand, development is the gradual transformation of behavioral and skill set changes. So like what I said a while back, when we speak of growth, we are only referring to the physical change, okay? The changes in the physical attributes. But development, on the other hand, it's the transformation of the behavioral and skills. So it's more of the changes from within. You tend to be more matured. You tend to adopt the necessary skills needed as you grow older. You tend to understand the complexities of life. You tend to be transformed from an ordinary person into a matured one, like that of the butterfly that is being transformed into a caterpillar. So like butterfly, for humans, we also metamorphose, right? And that metamorphosis for humans is actually called development. And lastly, growth focuses on one aspect of your child's life, okay, one aspect per se, and that is the physical aspect, while development focuses on the several aspects, actually all aspects of one's personality that will start from the emotional state, from the intellectual capacity, interpersonal skills, and the other skills needed for this person to survive. So if growth is only limited to physical change, then development will take charge of the rest, okay? So there is development that is happening if the person becomes more emotionally stable, if the person becomes more intellectually, more, okay, I would like to repeat, the person becomes more emotionally stable, and then he becomes more intelligent, and he shows very good skill when it comes to dealing with other people, and at the same time, I would like to insert, he would show good skill when it comes to dealing to his own self, okay? So if things like those are done by the person, then that person really is showing very good development. Okay, and there are actually two processes of development, one of which is the growth or evolution, and at the same time, atrophy or the involution. The growth or the evolution, I would like to claim, is the positive form of development. So you grow, you evolve from a baby to an adult, you become more intelligent, you become more capable, but atrophy, on the other hand, is the opposite of evolution, okay? Many researchers would claim that growth and evolution actually is happening in the earlier years of life, but involution or atrophy is happening in the latter stages of life. So, dito sa atrophy, kaya minsan meron tayong tinatawag na mga atrophic, mga diseases, they call it atrophic for that matter. Ito yung mga panahon that our body, even our mental state, is beginning to decline. Kaya nga yung mga old ones, like those who are already retiring at the age of 60, hindi na nila ginagawa yung mga usual na ginagawa nila. They are the ones who usually experience involution. Everything declines. Their mental state declines, their health also declines, even their physical attributes also decline. So, ito yung kabaliktaran ng growth or ng evolution na tinatawag. So, basically, development could either be positive or could either be negative. Next, how about learning? How do we define learning? Okay, learning is the aspect of development that connotes modification of behavior, and these changes in behavior is the result of practice and of experience. This is what I always tell my students in the undergrad. We can only claim that the students learn something if they are showing different behavior, if they are showing good behavior. So we cannot claim, for instance, pumasok ka sa klase, ng June, magugulo ang mga estudyante mo. March na, magugulo pa rin sila. So you can never claim that there is learning that took place. Because we can only claim that learning took place if you can see changes in behavior. So pag nung una, medyo bastos sila or medyo hindi sila maayos, at nung March na naging refined sila, naging okay na sila, then you congratulate yourself as a teacher, meaning you did the right thing. Okay. Now, let's look into the meaning then of human development based on these The definition is given. It's the pattern of movement or change that usually begins at conception and continues through the lifespan. That's why it's a lifelong process. Development is a lifelong process. And it includes as well growth. That's why we mentioned the term evolution. And it also includes decline. That's why we have the term atrophy. It could be positive and it could be negative at the same time. Okay. Now let's look into the various aspects of development. This is self-explanatory because we have mentioned many of these a while back. So these are the aspects of development: the physical, intellectual, personality, social, moral development, and that of the spiritual development. I remember when I discussed Max Keller's hierarchy of values, the apex of all the aspects of development is actually the spiritual development. Okay? And I think as Christians and as practicing Catholics, we also have to make sure that we must have all these aspects of development, and the most important thing would be this last one, the spiritual development. All right. And there are also two approaches to human development. The first of which is the traditional approach, and the second one is the lifespan approach. So marami ring mga researchers ang nagtatalo sa kung ano nga ba ang better approach when it comes to human growth and development. Is it traditional approach or is it the lifespan approach? Now let's try to differentiate. When we speak of traditional approach, we are referring to the extensive. The changes are extensive from birth to adolescence, but no change at all in the adulthood, and then eventually at old age, this change declines. So naniniwala sila na nag-grow lang or nagde-develop lang ang isang tao at an early stage of life hanggang the period of maturity or period of adolescence, and then mag-i-stop na doon. No development, no growth that will happen after that, pero mag-decline na siya kapag old age na. Okay? Pero ang sinabi naman ng lifespan approach, hindi yun totoo. It actually negates the traditional approach to human development, because the lifespan approach claims that development takes place even in adulthood as it does during the childhood, which is actually true, right? Development does not stop. Development is a continuous process. I would like to present the different characteristics of human development for lifespan perspective according to Paul Baltus. Sabi niya, development is lifelong. Okay? It doesn't stop somewhere. It's a continuous process. You develop from birth to death. Okay? And he also said that development is plastic. And he defined plasticity as the potential for change. Meaning, development is plastic. That's why it's lifelong, because there's always a potential for change. Everyone has a potential for change. Kaya hindi rin dapat iisa ang tingin natin sa tao. Pwedeng, because the person really changes, right? Because development is possible all throughout the lifespan. Next, development is multidimensional. It's multidimensional because it consists of biological, cognitive, and social emotional dimensions. And I think I mentioned that one a while back. Okay? Development as well is contextual. That's what it says here. Individuals are changing beings in a changing world. Usually, the development that we have is reflective of the kind of society we belong to. So it's contextual because your development and even your growth are actually being influenced by the kind of environment you have and by the kind of nature that you have. Okay? Next. Development involves growth, involves maintenance, and it also involves regulation. So those are the different qualities of development according to Paul Baltus. Now, let's move on to the common biological processes in development. It says their development is relatively orderly, okay? It's a step-by-step process. It's systematic, it's organized. That's why we have the term proximal-distal pattern of development and that of cephalopodal pattern of development at the same time. here in the proximal distal pattern of development, kailangang aralin mo muna yung una mong dapat maaral before you could move on to a more complex task. So for a baby, the baby learns how to sit first, and then eventually he learns how to crawl, how to walk, and how to run. Same is true with the cognitive ability development. The child learns how to speak first, and then eventually he learns how to listen first and to speak and to read and to write at the same time. It's always a process. It's very orderly. And cephalocodal pattern, on the other hand, is the growth always starts from top to bottom. So you have to develop the head first down to the other parts of your body. Okay? In your CLMS account, I actually have given you a research word about researches on proximal distal pattern of development and at the same time cephalocodal pattern of development. I would like to study these two terms and answer the different exercises provided for you. Just feel free to navigate your TLMS accounts, okay? And next, development takes place gradually. So the biological processes, there should be change in the physical characteristics. There'll also be changes in the individual's intelligence and the use of the language. And at the same time, there'll also be changes in individual relationships with people, changes in his emotion, and at the same time, changes in his own personality. So there should be a gradual change in all these processes that you have. Now, these are the different principles of growth and development. So we have differentiation and integration. The explanation of this one is actually provided in your CLMS account. There must be developmental direction. Early foundations are critical. This is really true because there are a lot of studies which would tell us that if the child was not being developed at the early stage of his life, then it's expected that he will not be the person that the society expects him to be in the future. So there is really a need that, that the kids must be taught the proper way at an early stage of their lives. Okay? Kaya when it comes to teaching, I always tell this to my students, the best ones really must be elementary teachers. So if you think you are good, then you should become an elementary teacher because you are setting the foundation. You are teaching them the foundation, which is very critical for the kind of person they will become in the future. Next, all individuals are different. Okay? All individuals are different. We are unique in our own ways. That's why it's not good that you compare your child to someone else. It's not also good that you compare one class to the other class because all of us are totally different. There are people who blooms in the latter stages of their lives. There are people who blooms at an early stage of their lives. So, yun, iba-iba ang ating growth, iba-iba din ang ating development. We shine at our own time like the flowers bloom in its own time. Kaya nga, yun lang pala yun. Okay, next. We also have each phase of development has characteristics, of course, and each phase of development, it has characteristics and at the same time, it has hazards. Okay? Development is aided by stimulation and that growth is unique. That's why comparison is a big no-no. And lastly, there are social expectations for every stage of development. Ito ang medyo mahirap kasi minsan yung expectations ng tao sa atin ay mas mataas sa kung ano ang kaya natin gawin. Like for teachers, di ba, the people expect a lot of things from teachers. Okay? Na porke teacher ka, dapat you must be modest, you must be good, you must be like this, you must be perfect, you must not be committing any mistakes. You know, these are social expectations. But, yeah, we have to accept the fact that there are social expectations, but I would like to suggest that we should not be pressured, to meet all these expectations, and we should not be pressured to please other people, because the most important thing naman is tayo that we know ourselves more than they do. Okay, and lastly, The various aspects of development are integrated. They are all interconnected, intertwined. One stage is connected to the other stage. One development is connected to the next. Okay? So now these are the issues I would like to present, though I will not be discussing this one in total because it's your job to conduct researches about these issues in development. Maraming mga researchers nag-conduct na ng mga studies about these issues, but up to this time, they can never provide conclusive statements about these different issues. Una, ito yung lagi nating naririnig, nature versus nurture. Ano nga ba ang mas influential sa development natin? Yung nature ba natin, or yung biological inheritance, or yung genes ba natin, or the nurture, or the environment where we live in? Okay? Ano nga ba ang mas matimbang? Ano nga ba ang mas influential? The next one, continuity versus discontinuity. Does development involve gradual, cumulative changes or distinct changes? And lastly, stability versus change. Is development best described as stability or involving change? And like what I said, I would like you to visit your CLMS account, okay? And I would like you to answer the questions provided there about these different issues of development. And it's up to you to decide. I think I have given you one particular video to watch, a video from YouTube to watch. And I would like you to study that one and answer the questions provided about issues on development. But nonetheless, both genes and environment are necessary to a person's growth and development. Okay, and this ends my presentation about the concepts and issues about human growth and development. See you next time.
Hello everyone, I'm Joie Padron, your instructor in the subject Foundations of Education. Okay? And you know, my students in the undergrad know me very well. I always tell them that one of my favorite professionals are actually teachers. You are my favorite professionals because I really believe that your job to the society is immeasurable and that respect must be given to all of you out there. And subjects like this, Foundations of Education, ay napaka-importante because it's only through this subject that we are given an opportunity to relearn the evolution of education from the beginning up to the present so that we may be able to become knowledgeable, more knowledgeable of the past. And at the same time, this knowledge would help us better understand the present and eventually would give us the means to predict the future. Okay? So as we go along with the foundations of education, historical foundations more specifically, let us try to recall our practices in our own classrooms, even the methods that we use in our teaching, and let's try to figure out where did they originate or where did they come from, okay? But we shall be, like what I said, we shall be coming up with the historical foundations of education, and the first thing that we have to understand is why do we have such term as education and why do we have schools everywhere? Okay, what is then our job as teachers in these different educational institutions? Okay, so when we speak of education, this is actually an institution that is created by the society. Okay, it is an institution primarily created so that students, the young generation, will be developed. Okay, so that they may be able to survive in this fast-changing world, so that they may be able to find security and stability, and at the same time, so that they may be able to experience convenience. Alright? And at the same time, the school introduces and trains each child with a spirit of service and effective self-direction. The two words I would like to emphasize in that particular definition of a school is spirit of service and effective self-direction. Okay? In other words, schools are built
so that it could make sure that the students, okay, are developed as individuals needed by the society, as individuals who could give service not only to the society but to everyone around him, and at the same time students or individuals who actually have very clean, very precise self-direction. Okay, so that is our role. So your role then, our role then as teachers is to make sure that we are developing our students exactly what the society needs. Okay? And at the same time, the school, it says here, is tasked. Okay, the job of the school is to impart specific knowledge and skills necessary for functioning in the society. So our job then is to make sure that this one is done by the school where we are coming from. You know, this is my belief. The kind of teacher the school has reflects the quality the school offers. And at the same time, the quality of the school is totally dependent on the quality of its teachers. So if the teachers are very good, the school is also very good. If the teachers are very much knowledgeable as regards teaching the students in the appropriate manner, then school also is considered to be a quality school. So the quality of school is dependent to the quality of teachers, and the quality of teachers ay reflected sa quality ng estudyanteng meron siya. So kung ang mga products ng school mo ay maayos na estudyante, then the teacher did the right thing and the school did the right thing. Kailan natin masasabi ng school ay ginawa niyang maayos ang kanyang mga estudyante? Kapag graduate siya sa school na yon at naging functioning member of the society ang estudyante na ito. Okay? Next. School is also tasked. It's also another task of the school to transmit cultural values. Okay? This is very important. Okay? That the school, kaya nga tayo sa school, meron tayong tinatawag na localization o kaya glocalization, because the job is the school is to make sure that the students, despite technology, okay, despite modernization, the student still understands the values that the society upholds. Okay? And those values must be inculcated in the very core of the students. So that is your job as teachers. Now, let's look into the kind of education during the primitive time, and because like what I said a while back, if we are able to understand what happened in the past, the more that we can understand what is happening at present, and will eventually understand what might happen, what might possibly happen in the future. So let's take a look at the kind of education during the primitive or during the pre-literate times. Ibig sabihin, ito yung mga panahon na hindi pa marunong silang magbasa or magsulat. Ito yung panahon na ang pamumuhay pa lang nila ay napakasimple. Okay, let's take a look at this. So noong panahon ng primitive times, ang kanilang kultura ay napakasimple. Why is it very simple? Because their lives would only revolve on, finding for food, finding for shelter, and at the same time protect the people around them. Food, shelter, and protection. So that's the main goal of the people during the earlier times. And at the same time, it's considered to be narrow social and cultural contacts. Very narrow. Their world is only limited in the four corners of their tribe. Okay? Their ideas are only limited to what is happening in the four corners of their place. That is why they are very conservative. Kung ano yung practice nila, yun lang din ang iniisip, ang ginagawa nila. And they are very superstitious. So they tend to explain, if they cannot explain what is happening around them, they would always associate that to their gods, of rock, lahat. Pag kumulog, nagagalit ang god nila. Pag umulan, umiihi ang god nila. So because they cannot understand the phenomena around them or in their place, they're trying to explain that by means of associating supernatural belief or superstitions. Okay? Next. And at the same time, the primitive life was tribal. It was not political. So walang mga politika ng mga panahong yun. They are not there to please the people around them. Okay? Their lives is very simple. They only have to make sure that they follow prescriptions. Ito yung mga kung ano lang ang dapat nilang gawin sa society nila. Kung bawal pumunta sa gantong lugar, sinusunod nila. Kung bawal gawin ito, sinusunod nila. They were actually following prescriptions, and at the same time, they had to make sure that they know the proscriptions. Ito naman yung mga taboos. Ito yung mga bawal gawin. Ito yung mga immoral. Ito yung mga bawal gawin, bawal kainin, bawal sabihin, all these things. So, ang buhay nila noon very simple. Right? It's simple as, maghanap sila ng food, mag-secure sila ng shelter, at i-protect nila ang mga tao sa mga paligid nila. Dapat sundin nila lahat ng morals, ng code sa kanilang mga lugar, and at the same time, alam nila kung ano yung mga bawal at hindi bawal. Okay? Very simple, but now totally different. Okay? Ngayon, ang aim lang nila noon, the life skills. Okay? The aim of education, the simplest form of education during the pre-literate time is to teach students, to teach their kids life skills. Una, dapat, ito yung mga skills nila. Una, dapat they know where to find security and survival. Alam nila kung paano i-protect ang sarili nila at ang mga tao sa paligid nila, and they know exactly how to survive. And they can only do this if they are able to come up with tools which would protect them and their tribes, and if they know how to come up with instruments that would allow them to find food easier and allow them to protect their tribes that better. Okay? Next, kaya nga dito, nabubuhay sila noon dahil sa takot, fear. And the fear was actually their greatest motivation for action. So natatakot silang mamatay. Natatakot silang hindi mag-survive. Okay? Kaya ginagawa nila lahat para hindi sila mamatay. And at the same time, this becomes the earliest motive of education. Because they were afraid to die, they did everything for them to survive. They listened to their elders, they listened to their father or mother, they did not do what they hadn't do during that, they did do what is not asked of them because of fear. Second, conformity or adherence, okay? Conformity to the laws of the land. So they have to make sure that they adhere to the moral group, to the moral code of the group. Kasi lahat ng mga tribes nun may kanya-kanyang paniniwala. Meron silang kanya-kanyang bawal at hindi bawal. May kanya-kanya silang ito ang dapat gawin at ito ang hindi dapat gawin. At kapag ikaw ay member ng isang tribe, ng isang group, then you cannot do anything but to conform with with the laws that is existing in your own tribe. Okay? At kapag ka-disobedient ka, okay, disobedience is unpardonable during that time. So you really have to be very obedient as possible. And the third one, preservation and transmission of traditions. That's why we have the term enculturation. Lahat ng mga practices ng mga mas nakakatanda sa kanila are transmitted to their sons and their sons to their sons. So meaning from generation to generation. And the transmission or the preservation of all these things are done orally. Okay? Even the language, they did not study the language but they merely imitated the elders. They merely imitated the actions of the elders, and so they copied everything. So kung anong ginagawa ng matanda, yun ang pinaka-model nila. Kung ano yung sinasabi ng matanda, yun yung ginagawa nila. It's only then that they are able to preserve their tradition. That's why we have the term enculturation. Okay? Kahit naman ngayon yata, we are trying to preserve and to transmit our traditions. Kaming mga Ilocano, ang dami ring mga tradisyon na pinapasa pilit sa amin ng aming mga magulang at kami rin sa aming mga anak. At wala namang masama kung susundin mo yon, so long as you think that that is within the boundaries of morality. Okay? And yun yung mga life skills na tinuturo sa kanila. At another thing sa mga lalaki, kasi noong mga panahong yon, ang ginagawa nila is to hunt, okay? To come up with hacks, ganun. Ang mga babae naman, how to become good good mothers, how to become good wives, and at the same time, how to perfectly do household chores. So, noong mga panahong iyon, doon na nagkaroon ng stereotyping, gender stereotyping as regards yung trabaho na dapat gawin ng babae at yung trabaho na dapat gawin ng lalaki. So, doon actually nagsimula hanggang ngayon. Ginagawa pa rin natin kasi kahit ngayon, meron tayong gender stereotype. Ang mga lalaki dapat hindi naguhugas, ang mga babae lang dapat ang naguhugas. Though there are a lot of families who do not believe in such anymore. And that's good. Okay? Now, what are the types of educations that happened during that time? Pinakauna, vocational. Dito sila natututo kung yung mga life skills. Skills that are very essential for them to live and to survive. The first of which is hunt. They hunt for their food, they construct their huts, they protect, they came up with fences to protect their tribes, very vocational, okay? And religious or animalistic at the same time. Kasi aside from they have to know vocational or household chores, they also have to make sure that they participate religious practices, like they go into rituals, so that they may be able to appease the spirits, unseen spirits. They do it through music, through songs, or through poems, okay? They praise their gods through music, through songs. So kapag they also offer something to the unseen spirits, to the roaming spirits. Kasi baka raw magalit at bigyan sila ng mga sakit and the like. That's how education was done during the primitive time. Very simple, pero very practical at the same time. Okay, now, ano yung mga agencies of education during that time? The first of which is home. The father, or the mother, or the teachers, or the elders in the society, sila yung mga teachers nila. Okay? And, at the same time, the environment. Tinuturuan yung mga batang lalaki kung paano mag-hunt using the forest that they have within their place, their tribe. So it's basically home and environment. It was very informal because ang nagtuturo lang sa kanila ay mga parents nila o ang kanilang mga the eldest members of the society. Okay? Next, but when these tribes were settled, it's then the time that civilization came into picture. And so, na-conquer lahat ng mga tribes during that time ng mas malalakas na tribe, and they became subject to conquests. That's why, dito pumapasok yung nagkaroon na ng mixture ng mga kultura, the stronger tribes conquered the weaker tribes, and the product of this conquest was actually a higher level of culture. Okay, the higher level of culture. And at the same time, laging higher na rin yung form ng pamumuhay nila because they were able to use bronze, iron, and they were able to come up with the elaborate forms of writing. Okay? So, dito na nag-umpisa ang tinatawag nating Oriental education, which was actually being dominated by the Chinese. So sabi natin, pag sinabing Oriental, ito yung sa mga Chinese, Japanese, ito yung mga kinds of educations na meron sila. At sinasabi natin, it's actually one of the most enduring kind of civilization because the language and the culture were superior during this time. Naniniwala ang mga Orientals na kasi sila yung mga unang sumakop sa mga smaller tribes, okay? Sila yung nagpalaki ng kanilang mga tribo at ng kanilang nasasakupan. And so because they were the conquerors, they were able to conquer smaller tribes, and they were very ethnocentric, meaning they believed that the language and their culture were superior to the others. Okay? At ang pag-feeling nila, pag hindi nila nasakop yon at may ibang lahi na umaalig-aligid sa kanila, they consider the culture of these people as barbarians, as lower than their culture and their language. Okay? Another is the Egyptian education. So after the Oriental education, here comes Egyptian education, and this is actually one of the earliest forms of civilization. Okay? And dito, sila yung unang nag-start ng unified system of government because for them it was necessary, okay? And they were actually being ruled by pharaohs, And these pharaohs were, sabi diba, lagi silang ina-associate sa mga supernatural beings na sila ay blessed at pinoprotektahan ng isang god or ng mga gods. At naniniwala sila na ang mga pharaohs are mga representatives of the gods. And so their powers were actually obsolete. So sila ang may karapatan o nagkokontrol sa buhay ng lahat ng mga tao sa pangapaligid nila. But the Egyptians, despite the fact that they were actually being controlled by pharaohs, and by pharaohs, hindi naman sila nagrereklamo because they believe that being controlled by a pharaoh, a representative of a god, is actually a privilege. It's a pleasure. It's a privilege. Okay? So the power of the pharaohs were absolute. Next. Ano ang aims ng mga Egyptian education? Una, cultural. Dito, ang education nila was basically there, the schools were there, kasi ang pinakaunang role ng education during that time was to make sure na ang kultura ng mga Egyptians ay naitatransmit from one generation to another, and at the same time, it was utilitarian. Meaning, lahat ng tinuturo sa schools ay kung ano ang nagagamit nila sa everyday lives nila. That's why it's utilitarian, because what is functional is important. So, kung ano yung pwede mong gawin sa bahay mo, sa lugar mo, sa society na kinabibilangan mo, dapat yun ang pinag-aaralan mo. Kaya nga, writing and account keeping were very indispensable during that time. And Japanese, Egyptians were actually known because of their excellent record keeping. Okay? Account keeping. Lahat ng kanilang mga achievements, lahat ng kanilang mga trabaho, lahat ng kanilang mga nagawa sa mga buhay nila at sa bansa nila were really recorded. Okay? And are shared sa lahat ng mga taong pumupunta sa mga lugar nila. And the types, domestic training, the women, ang ginagawa mga household chores, ang mga lalaki, hunt, and the like, and at the same time, religious, because gaya ng sinabi natin, dito sila nag-start maniwala sa mga different gods, and at the same time, vocational, professional, then. Okay, now, after ng Egyptian education, we have Greek education. Okay? So, let us have the Greek education. Ito yung isa sa mga pinaka-magandang kinds of education kasi naniniwala lahat ng mga educationists and philosophies that the Greeks were people of thoughts. Okay? So, ang roots nito, sila ang pinag-ugatan ng creative activity at logical thinking. Matatalino ang mga Greeks, they said, because sila yung pinakaunang mga lahi na nagkaroon ng refined kind of education. At sila yung nag-start sa science, napakarami na ng achievements sa structure, sa architecture, sa education, sa literature. Actually, sa 4 na greatest literary playwrights the world has ever produced, 3 sa kanila ay mga Greeks, isa doon ay si Shakespeare. Pagdating sa science, napakarami rin nilang mga nagawa. Pagdating sa sport, sa kanila nag-umpisa ang Olympics, okay? So, sa kanila nag-start ang creative activity at logical activity at the same time. Though, the Greek cities were totalitarian states, they claimed authority over the lives of the individuals, okay? Ito yung kanilang mga accomplishments in the field of education. Pag sinawag natin Greeks kasi, laging dalawa yan. Laging Athenians o kaya Spartans. Ang Athenians and Spartans, though they belong to the same country, but they actually have different beliefs. Ang mga Spartans, they were considered to be the men of action. Ang mga Athenians, they were believed to be the men of thought. So kapag magaling makipaglaban, mga Spartans yung mga yon. Kapag mga philosophers, mga sophists, mga magagaling sa science at math, mga Athenians yung mga yon. Okay? So, tingnan po natin yung format na ito because later this is what you're going to do with the other historical groups. The first of which should be the historical groups followed by educational goals, the curriculum, the agents, and the influences on Western education. So, unahin natin ang Greeks started 600 BC until 300 BC. Ang educational goals ng mga Greeks is merely to cultivate civic responsibility because that's the identity of the state. So, the Greek education is focuses primarily on the cultivation of civic responsibility. They actually taught individuals to be responsible members of a particular society. Kapag ikaw ay Athenian, ang gustong i-develop sa'yo is a well-rounded personality. There must be the development of the rationality, and then the heart, and then the actions. But if you're the Spartan, ikaw ay dinidevelop to be soldiers, to be military leaders. Okay, so magkaiba sila. Ang curriculum, dito sa Greek curriculum is more of, for the Athenians taught their students how to read and how to write, how to do arithmetic, and they also focus on the literature. But for the Spartans, more of drills, more of military songs, more of tactics. So dito nag-umpisa po yung mga practices na ginawa natin dati sa CAT natin, sa mga tacticals natin, at yung mga ibang practices in the military sa kanila po nag-umpisa. For the agents, sa mga Athens, ang mga teachers nila ay mga private school teachers, mga sophists at mga philosophers. Pero para sa mga Spartans, ang mga teachers nila ay mga military, mga surgeons, mga high-ranking officials ng kanilang military. Okay? At anong influences ng mga ito sa education, sa kabuuan? First of which, ang mga Athenians, they were actually the concept of well-rounded and liberally educated persons. So sa kanila nag-ugat yung holistic education na tinatawag. That we are not only teaching kids this part, okay, hindi lang natin sila pinapatalino, hindi lang natin sila ginagawang rational people with rationality, at hindi lang natin sila tinuturuang gamitin ang kanilang rationality sa pang-araw-araw nilang buhay, but we are teaching them how to be whole-rounded. Paano maging magaling, at kung paano maging mapait at the same time. But for the Spartans, eto, umiikot lang sa concept ng military. So kapag ikaw, ang mga bata ay nag-aral sa PNPA or sa PMA for that matter, ang kanilang practices doon ay nag-originate sa Athenian, sa Spartan education. Okay, next. Meron namang tayong tinatawag na Roman. The Roman group naman siya, right after the Greek education. So dito sa Roman, unlike Greeks, eto naman, develop military and administrative military skills. So, ang mga Roman po kasi, sinakop nila yung mga Greeks during the earlier times, and yung mga Romans, na-believe sila sa mga accomplishments ng mga Greeks. Kaya, halos lahat ng mga accomplishments ng mga Greeks, finalo nila, kinopy nila. So, they became copycat